Hello friends, welcome. Friends, today I just finished writing an article, and this article, which I am going to share a link in the description of this video, is India's GDP unveiled, the real story behind the growth figures. Now, this article is based on the publication which I saw yesterday, announced by the Indian government, which is regarding the GDP, provisional GDP estimate for annual GDP numbers for the financial year, the past financial year, which is FY24, as well as the quarterly estimate for the past financial year, which is the Q4, which was announced along with these the yearly numbers. Now, this document is going to be quite overwhelming. So in order for me to help write this article, which consists of a lot of charts, which might also be a little bit overwhelming to read because you have to read through the chart very, very cautiously and patiently, I created this dashboard. And the reason I'm doing this video is to make you understand this article clearly, so that you can appreciate the article and you don't have to, put so much amount of effort to painfully go through the article. So therefore, I'm doing this video to make you understand what these numbers really look like and what are the concerns and what are the opportunities. Okay. So let's begin without wasting any time. Now, as I always do, I have menu-driven dashboard. So by driving this menu down below, you can choose between the various dimensions, right? Which is GDP constant means GDP at the 2011-12 prices. GDP current means the nominal GDP, which is based on the current prices. GVA constant is the production, way of, there are two ways of actually calculating GDP. One is the consumption mode, which is the GDP constant. Another is the production mode. Both these are going to be mapped with each other, and I'll tell you how these are getting mapped. And then there is a factor called discrepancy, which is kind of getting adjusted in order to make those numbers align with each other, right? So discrepancy becomes very, very important. And you will notice that in this calculation and in this video, that how important discrepancy has been in our GDP and why discrepancy has played a very important role in elevating the GDP numbers of the current financial year compared to what we saw in past. Okay, so let's go into the analysis without wasting any time. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pull the current dashboard which is in front of you is basically spelling out the GDP constant number in value rupees lakh crores. So let me pull my pen and I'm going to show you the real number is 173.8 lakh crores. This is the number, right, which you should be focusing on. And this number is constitution, means it has been made by private final consumption expenditure, gross fixed capital formation expenditure, government final consumption expenditure, CIS, valuables, export, discrepancy, which I spoke about, and imports. Now you notice that of all these dimensions, the import is the only dimension which is negative, which is getting subtracted out from these numbers to arrive at this number of 173.8 lakh crores. Now notice that last year numbers were 160.7 lakh crores. From this number, there seems to be a huge jump. This jump is a very, very significant jump. It's actually around 13.1 lakh crores. If you do a subtraction here from this number to this number comes out to be 13.1 lakh crores. And when you calculate the growth, let me just show you what the growth numbers look like. So I'll just take growth here from this menu. In rupee terms, you will notice that the growth numbers are 8.2% on annual terms compared to 7% last year. So last year we had a growth of 7%, and this year the growth number is, let me take my pen. Sometimes it kind of misbehaves. Just hold on for a minute. This is a problem with the live dashboard. Okay, so here is my pen, and this is the 7% number, 7% growth number here. And the last year, and the current number is 8.2%, right? So this number looks pretty decent and reasonable, and people are very elevated about it. Now let's go and look at the growth numbers of the individual components. Now the private final consumption expenditure growth number is 4%. The gross fixed capital formation number is 9%. The government final consumption expenditure, the growth is 2.5%. The CIS, the growth is 6%. The valuable is 21.3%, which is very negligible, which you can simply ignore. Export is 2.6%. And discrepancy we are going to talk about. This is very important. And we have imports, which is 10.9%. So import numbers have grown, but it has remained reasonably same level what we saw last year, which means that we are not able to contain import. And this is going to be very, very crucial. So now let's go back and look at the absolute values, because absolute values actually tells the story. The growth does not tell the story, real story. And therefore, in order for you to understand what is happening with our GDP, let's look at the absolute number. Now, as I told you, this number, which has increased from 160.7 lakh crores to 173.8 lakh crores, is 13.1 lakh crores. Now, on this 13.1 lakh crores, I'll go straight to the discrepancy, because that is where this number got elevated so much, and it giving you an impression of 8.2% of GDP growth. Why? Because if you look at the discrepancy number of last year, it was minus 5.5 lakh crores, which means that this base, which is 160.7 lakh crores, has been pulled down by 5.5 lakh crores. Normally it would have been 160.7 plus 5.5 lakh crores. So imagine if this number was not minus 5.5 lakh crores, then this level should have been what? 160.7. Let me just pull my calculation. One's calculator, 160.7 plus how much? 5.5 lakh crore, which is 166.2. Now if you subtract 166.2, let's say, let me just do the subtraction, 166.2 minus 173.8, it gives you a 7.6. So 7.6, so mind you, 7.6 versus how much? 13.1. Can you imagine? So if you divide 7.6, right? Let's do a division here. 7.6, if I divide by 166.2, 166.2. Let me just do the calculation. Again, let me see, 7.6 divided by 166.2, the growth comes out to me 4.5%. So can you imagine that how much is the growth getting impacted because of this discrepancy? And this discrepancy has played a very important role in pulling down the base, and therefore it gives you a feeling of an elevated growth, because this year the discrepancy has been 1.3 lakh crore versus last year the discrepancy, which was minus 5.5 lakh crores, right? I'll talk more about the discrepancy, and I will take you through my article also, so that you get an understanding as to how discrepancy has been acting in order to kind of distort these numbers. But before I get into that, let's look at one of the very important factor here, the factor of gross fixed capital formation. So if you look at the gross fixed capital formation, the number has increased from 53.5 lakh crores to 58.3 lakh crores, which is how much? Which is a 4.8 lakh crores of increase. So you can imagine that our GDP numbers are influenced by gross fixed capital formation, which is the expenditure the government of India is making on capital investment. So this capital investment is good. However, the private sector investments hasn't really grown significantly given the larger base. If you see this base, 93.2 lakh crores, which has grown to only 97 lakh crores, though it appears that there is a large growth, but this load is only 3.8 lakh crores. So from a large base of 93.2 lakh crores last year, there is only a 3.8 lakh crores of investment on the private consumption expenditure, and this is a matter of great concern, because if the private sector consumption is not increasing, which is a very, very large percentage of the overall number of 173.8, then it is a matter of concern. Why I am making this point? Because the government's ability to keep pushing capital formation will be influenced by the need to manage fiscal deficit, because the fiscal deficit numbers are pretty high, which is as high as 16 lakh crores. Now you have to drive down the fiscal deficit number in order to ensure that our rating as a country does not go down, and it is elevated, because recently there was a report on S&P 500 which says that if India is able to have more fiscal discipline, then they will improve India's rating in next 2 years. Means within this 2 years they will look at India, how India is doing as far as their fiscal management is concerned, and that will result in a good India's rating. Now India's rating is important because maybe next year the India will be able to publish or list is in India global bonds in the international market, and the global bonds valuation will determined by India's rating, and which will be a significant reason for India to manage its fiscal discipline. And therefore, going forward, such huge capital formation expenditure number may not be possible after the election. So we need to take that into consideration. So just to summarize here, first is the discrepancy. We are going to talk more about it, and then we are talking about the gross fiscal fixed capital formation, which has been a substantial, played a very important role in the GDP growth of India, and the concern that the private final consumption expenditure is not rising significantly, right? Because this is a very, very significant part of the overall GDP. So this is the matter of great concern. Now let's look at let's go to my article, because that article now you'll be able to understand once we have gone through the overview. So if you look at this article, what I am talking about this article is the same thing. If you look at this, the GDP constant yearly growth rate of 8.2%, and then I showed you all these things. And then the absolute values also I spoke about, where I said that the GDP numbers are largely influenced by what? Largely influenced by this gross filled capital formation, and the government final expenditure numbers as well as the private final expenditure numbers are not increasing, which is a substantial portion of the overall number. So we should be concerned. And then the discrepancy part we spoke about, and the rising import compared to, if you look at exports, the exports numbers have not grown significantly high, though we have been talking about increasing export. If this number is only 1 lakh crore compared to what we saw in last year, the imports though have increased, right? And that is a matter of concern because it is pulling down our GDP, because imports will get subtracted from the overall GDP numbers. Now let's look at the other aspect, the GVA constant, because this is basically the production GDP, because how it is calculated, let me just show you. The GVA number, the calculation is that whatever the GVA number you have here, which is 158.7 lakh crores, it is the production in agriculture, mining, manufacturing, electricity, utility, construction, trade and hotel and communication, financial services, and defense. So if you add all these dimensions, you are going to get this number of 158 lakh crores, 158.7 lakh crores, right? This is the number which you will get here. Now, how we are going to arrive at the GDP from this number? You have to add in 158.7 lakh crores, this 15.1 lakh crores of net taxes, which the government of India has collected, which is a substantial increase. You see, 12.7 lakh crores in the last financial year, and this year 15.1 lakh crores. Now, if you add this 15.1 lakh crores to 158.7 lakh crores, then you will basically arrive at this number, which we spoke about here, 173.8 lakh crores, this number. So there are two ways of calculating GDP. One is the GDP is the consumption model, another is the production model. Now, in order to match the consumption and the production model so that they are basically equal, we add this discrepancy factor. This is the discrepancy, right? This block. Now you will notice that the discrepancy numbers actually have been changing a lot, and I'm going to show you how this discrepancy has changed over a period of time by comparing the discrepancy of nominal versus real GDP. Now this table is very, very important. You should look at this table and read my article and look at this table very, very carefully and cautiously, because what this table basically tells you is the trend of discrepancy between the GDP constant, which is the real GDP, and the GDP current, which is the nominal GDP. Now you notice that from FY13 till FY19, the trend between the GDP, the discrepancy between the GDP, real GDP, and the GDP current has been more or less same. Means there have been slight here and there, but you can see that it's been more or less same. The numbers have not undulated significantly, right? If you see FY18, the discrepancy was 4.4 lakh crores as far as the GDP constant is concerned. Now GDP current, the discrepancy is how much? Was 4.6 lakh crores. Similarly, in FY19, it was positive of 1.7 lakh crores, is 2.7 lakh crores. Now, since FY20, the GDP numbers, as far as the discrepancy is concerned, is largely getting influenced by this base of this their discrepancy. Now you see here, then FY20 it was 4 lakh crores, then the discrepancy in case of GDP, nominal GDP was 0.9 lakh crores, then FY21 it was 2.2 lakh crores, it went negative to 2.5 lakh crores, then it basically went to negative 5 lakh crores, then it went to 2 lakh crores, then it went negative 5.5 lakh crores, in case of current it went to minus 3 lakh crores, and then this fiscal year the discrepancy as regards GDP constant went up by 1.3 lakh crores, and for GDP nominal it went down by minus 5.4 lakh crores. Can you see the difference between and the volatility of discrepancy between GDP constant and GDP current, which we haven't seen in past? Now, what is this discrepancy? So what I have done is I have captured this in this PowerPoint slide. So the different GDP calculation approach, which is the production approach, and the expenditure approach, which I already showed you, the GBA and the GDP, these have to be balanced, and the role of discrepancy is balancing these items. Now, if this balancing, what you do to balance this item will result in larger volatility, and if they are not correlated with each other as regards GDP current and GDP real, GDP is nominal versus real GDP, then it kind of becomes an indicator of data quality. Because if the data quality is not proper, if the GDP data is not collected proper, and the large increase of discrepancy can indicate a problem with the data collection and estimation method used in national accounts. So naturally, because if the GDP discrepancy is going to be huge, which is going to influence the base, the GDP base, such that your GDP numbers are going to get completely distorted. And let's go again and look at the discrepancy number. Look at this, 5.5 lakh crores. And if you add this 5.5 lakh crores, and then you basically make it all zero, there is no discrepancy, make it zero and make it zero here. As I told you, the GDP growth number, what you will see based on this calculation will be somewhere around 4%, not 8.2%. Right, so that is the kind of role that GDP discrepancy plays in the GDP calculation. Now let's go further here in my articles to basically get more insight. So what I have done is, as I told you, that I spoke about the nominal GDP, I spoke about the GDP, nominal GDP growth rate. Now, nominal GDP growth rate is also showing us some concern, because though the real GDP, let me just go through the diagram which basically talks about the real GDP growth. So if you look at the real GDP growth number, you will find that the real GDP growth number, not the GBA constant, the real GDP growth number, 9.8, 7% and 8.2. So it's like, because the base was low in FY21 because of COVID, there was a kicking of high GDP number of 9.8%, and then the numbers basically stabilized, and now it is 8.2%. Now if you go down here and look at the nominal GDP number, you will notice that there is a problem here. Why there is a problem? Let me explain to you. GDP. So you will find that the nominal GDP number growth is consistently going down, even after taking care of the distortion which we saw in FY21 because of COVID. So it's going 19%, 14.2% and 9.6%, which is pretty strange. If your GDP current real GDP number has stabilized, why the nominal GDP numbers are going down? And there is another problem which you see here, because of the discrepancy playing a very important role. Because these discrepancy numbers, if you see here, the GDP current numbers, you will notice that this is the growth number. So let me just take you through the absolute numbers here. Absolute numbers are right here. You will notice that the discrepancy numbers, as far as nominal GDP was concerned, which I showed you earlier, these numbers were positive, right? In the earlier financial year, right, these numbers are positive, which was FY13 till FY20. FY20, yes, FY20, and then from FY21, if you see here, FY21 till FY24, these numbers actually have become negative. See, these numbers have become negative, and they are increasingly becoming negative, which is pulling down this overall value and kind of creating a low base factor, and therefore the growth numbers are also going down. See, the growth numbers are going down. So why there should be such different growth numbers for nominal GDP and absolute GDP, which is a matter of concern, which we have to basically look into. And the other important thing to notice here is that as we go into this table, because the nominal GDP numbers are going down, it kind of creates a very, very detrimental factor as far as India's GDP growth in dollar terms are concerned. So let me just take you through the nominal GDP, which is GDP current, and then let's do a value in USD, because the USD value is a very important factor, which is dollar GDP number, because we are aspiring to become a $7 trillion economy. Now, because our nominal GDP numbers went down, so if you look at these numbers at the end of the financial year, what is the level of India's economy in dollar terms? This dollar terms, Indian economy is $3.56 trillion. So it is nowhere close to even $5 trillion, right? So we still have to go further. And if your nominal GDP numbers are going to decrease and your dollar is going to appreciate compared to rupee, then this is going to be a huge risk. And that is where the problem is, right? So let's look at that problem and let's understand it, how these numbers are going changing over a period of time. And let's look at the growth numbers, and you will find that as far as the dollar growth numbers are concerned, and if you compare the dollar growth number compared to FY13, the numbers were low in the initial years, and FY15 the numbers actually in dollar terms increased significantly. It was 9%, then it went little down, and then it was 9.9%, and then it went down by minus 16.1%, then basically it went up to 39.2%. But in FY23 and FY24, because of this discrepancy factor which I showed you, we can ignore this FY22 number because that is a distortion because of COVID year. These numbers are not substantially high, and that is why if the numbers are not going to be substantially high, you are going to face a problem, because the problem that you're going to see here is of the issue about this growth. Right, India becoming a $5 trillion and $7 trillion economy, those are going to get restricted and will slow it down. So, in summary, what we basically see in this GDP data, we are seeing that there is a substantial role which has been played by the gross fixed capital formation, which has increased significantly to 4.5 lakh crores. This fiscal underscores a strong government impetus in capital investment. However, the substantiality of this growth post-election remains uncertain, particularly considering the pressure to reduce fiscal deficit and to enhance India's international credit rating. Moreover, you need to notice that the private and the government final consumption expenditure raises concern about the foundational consumer demand and government spending, which are vital for balancing economic growth. Another critical point of concern is the imbalance in trade, with export not increasing in the same rate at import, which I already showed you. And the erratic behavior or discrepancy factor in GDP calculation introduced further complexity, and it kind of questions the quality of the data collected, because the discrepancy cannot be so high and it cannot be so volatile. We need to understand that what is going on, because this volatility not only complicates the understanding of the economic trend but also misleads stakeholders about the actual health of the economy. So we need to be more cautious. So this in net, the summary of our GDP number situation. So we need to look into it in more depth. Read my article and let me know if you have any comments and suggestions, and if you think otherwise, which I have missed, any topic which I have missed, on any concern that you have regarding my analysis, let me know in my comment section. I'll look into it and I probably will further improve my article, or maybe take that into account and come out with a new video to take those concerns into consideration as I carry forward with my future analysis. And thank you very much for your time as usual, for your patient listening, and I'll come back next time with a new video. Thank you very much.